purpose of this video is to demonstrate the proper technique and method for replacing the ports in the Fossil Aquarian 3000 visual bicolor ported level gauge. Normally, all the ports on this gauge would be replaced periodically when they reach the end of the useful life, and the life is determined based primarily on the operating pressure. However, if one of the ports did fail prematurely for some reason, a single port could be replaced. So we're going to demonstrate the technique for replacing a single port with the gauge remaining installed. If the gauge would require the full replacement of all the ports, then the gauge should be removed from the line and taken into a work area, the maintenance area, and worked on in that location. So the first thing that you need to do is take this is the port repair kit. You can check that it is from the labeling that it's the proper kit for this gauge replacement. And from this kit you need to remove the instruction sheet that's located inside the kit. Also have here the cushion. We have a service tag, which I'll talk about later, and we also have a cushion gasket. I'll talk about using that later on. But remove the instruction sheet and then read through the instructions and familiarize yourself with the steps necessary to repair the gauge. In addition to that, you need to collect the various tools together necessary to make the gauge repair. You'll need a 1/2-inch wrench like this to remove the illuminator and display. You need a torque wrench with this is a 3/8 inch 12-point socket. It's a 12-point, and that's for removing the cap screws from the port cover. And then we have a utility knife to work on the gasketing, a small screwdriver. You'll need a flashlight to do inspection of the gauge body. And then I have two measuring tools that we will need later for measuring the Belleville spring washers. This is a depth mic, 0 to 1 inch range. Or if that measuring tool was not available, you could also use these micrometers as a backup. But this would be the preferred device. Also, some safety glasses when you're working on the parts. I have some anti-seize for lubricating the bolts and other parts for assembly. And then also electric drill with this stainless steel wire end brush. And this is the preferred tool for cleaning out the gauge body prior to reassembling the parts. So once you've collected all that, you're ready to begin through the instructions. And the first step is to ensure that the gauge is properly isolated, depressurized, and cooled down. And this would be important whether if you were removing the gauge or if you were going to work on it in line. And then next, second step, to de-energize and remove the gauge illuminator and display. So we're going to demonstrate that next. So one other thing I wanted to mention was, in addition to the port kit, it's recommended that you have a few other spare parts for the gauge on hand, just in case any of those parts would be lost or damaged. The parts are normally reused, but there is always the chance that the parts would need to be replaced. These parts would be the the cover bolt, the bolts for the port cover. Also, of course, if it's a flanged gauge, you would need the gaskets for the flange to replace those. Have also the Belleville spring washers. Should have a couple of those on hand, and then also the flat washer. One additional item is that if this is a upgrade for the Yarway color port gauge, your repair kit would look like this, and it would come with a replacement flat washer, and this has kind of a yellowish gold coloration. So this flat washer is then put into the gauge in place of the original flat washer, and this is a one-time replacement. So this the kit for the Yarway upgrade. So this is now step number 2 of the procedure, which is removing the illuminator and the display section. So these retaining nuts just need to be loosened on the sides of the gauge, both sides of the gauge. And then the illuminator section is just lifted off in this way because it's on these hooks. And the display section lifted off and removed. Okay, this is step number 4 in the procedure, which is removing the bolts from the probe cover, or from the port cover. So you just are gradually loosening each of these and kind of sequentially going across. I would caution that if the bolt torque is becoming exceptionally high and the bolt is not moving, that I would then recommend putting some bolt loosener and just kind of let the bolts perhaps soak. You can spray that on the sides to because you don't want to damage the bolts when you're removing them, strip them, or break the bolts. So if the torque is getting too high, you should put some of that bolt loosener on first. So once you get 3 of the bolts removed and there's just 1 bolt remaining, you want to support the port cover and then just remove the last bolt. And then when you remove the cover, most likely just the glass section, the retainers, will come out in your hand. The part that's remaining in here is the mica with the retainer for the mica. I'm going to demonstrate how to remove that, but normally it's that remains in the gauge because the graphite has made a bond and is sealed against the gauge body. So you can see here that the mica and the retainer are still in the gauge body. So what you want to do is just with a small screwdriver, just pry around the edges of this retainer and to remove it from the gauge. You don't have to worry if this retainer is damaged during removal, because this retainer will not be reused. So there we pop it out. So it shows the mica and the retainer, and then you have the surface then of the gauge body itself with the groove, and we'll demonstrate the cleaning of that later on. Okay, this is now on to step number 5 and number 6 of the repair procedure, which is disassembling the parts from the port cover and getting some of them ready for reuse. So first is to remove this retaining spring from the gauge, and we remove this here. So this part will be reused. They also then can remove the Belleville spring washers and the flat washer. We show here the flat washer with the cushion gasket. Often the glass will remain firmly stuck onto this flat washer, and that's the reason for having the utility knife, that to remove the glass you can just kind of gently cut around the glass till that can be removed, because the glass we dispose of, but we do need to reuse the flat washer. The one with this flat washer, this cushion gasket, it has a graph foil with a stainless steel like liner or stainless steel filler, so you can see you can pry under that stainless steel piece and then just pull that off. We will clean this flat washer thoroughly. My preference is to use a wire wheel on a bench grinder, as that's an effective way of cleaning this properly. And I also removed the Belleville spring washers from the port cover. Before these are reused, the height of the Bellevilles will need to be measured. And the best way for doing this is to place these on a solid metal surface, and then using the depth mic, you place those on the top of the Bellevilles, and then just coming down, measuring the free height of the Bellevilles. You can see that these are nested together, with the cone portion is pointing in the same direction. The cone, the highest point is here, and the outer edge contact point is there. As I mentioned before, if you didn't have the depth mics available, you could also measure this carefully with a micrometer caliber, and just, you can get a reading that way. The depth mic, however, is more effective. So here's the flat washer with the old cushion gasket material cleaned off and ready for reuse. And then with the Belleville spring washers, if you've measured them with your depth mic, and the minimum height is 0.285 inches. And again, this is according to step number 8 of the repair procedure. So if the Bellevilles are suitable for reuse, what you want to do is to just apply a small amount of the anti-seize on one of the Bellevilles, just a couple dots like this, and then put it together with the other one and just rotate it like this, and that distributes the anti-seize lubricant, and it just helps the proper functioning of the Bellevilles in the visual gauge. Okay, this is step number 9 of the repair procedure, which is cleaning the gauge body. I have the electric drill with the stainless steel wire end brush. So you want to inspect the inside of this port. It's also a good idea just to wipe it out with a rag, get any gasket material or any debris out of there. When you're inspecting it, you want to look and make sure that there aren't any steam cuts also across the groove, which could lead to premature port failure, and just check that all the old gasket material is removed. Okay, we're going to look now at steps of the repair procedure, which are number 10, 11, and 12. The first thing is the cover, the port cover. You want to just make sure any material is removed from there. It might be some residual gasket material or anti-seize, and just kind of do a wipe with a rag and prepare that for reuse. Then the Bellevilles are ready to go back in the port cover first, and as we mentioned, they go in with the cone. This is the highest point at the center, is pointing up towards you, and so that way when you drop it in, the outer edge will contact the port cover, and then the inner edge here will be what contacts the flat washer. So the Bellevilles go in first, then the flat washer on top next. Then from your port kit, you install a new cushion gasket that goes in, get that centered in the port, and then use the retaining spring to hold everything in place, and you just snap that retaining spring back into the gauge. Try to move the cushion gasket slightly, just so that it's centered in the port cover. If the cushion gasket would be shifted, it can block some of the light going through the gauge and it would reduce the visibility. So just try to center that in the middle of the cover. Then you want the repair kit, you want to carefully remove it from the box, and do not touch the mica with your fingers. It's important that you don't get any oils or grease or anything on the mica that it could reduce the life. So try to remove it from the sides of the box. Before you install it, check that the graphfoil gasket is centered in the stainless retaining clip. So you should be able to see a thin amount of graphfoil all around the repair kit before you install it. The easiest way to now install it in the port cover is to kind of start it on one side of the retainer, and then just using your thumbs kind of gently push it on one edge and snap it into place. If it's off to one side, you can just use your fingers to center the port kit in the middle of the cover, and then it's now ready to be reinstalled back into the gauge. Okay, step 13 is to lubricate the threads of the port cover bolts. And so you only have to lubricate, say, about the lower 3/4 of an inch of the threads, because that's what goes into the gauge body. And then you also want to put just a small amount of anti-seize on the head of the bolt, and that just helps also reduce the contact friction. So just go ahead and put that anti-seize on. This is important to have the proper lubrication, because the bolts are an alloy steel material, and the body of the gauge is a 300 series stainless steel. So you do want to have adequate lubrication to prevent any possible seizing of the bolts in the stainless steel gauge body. This is steps number 14 and 15 of the repair procedure. You're now ready to install the rebuilt port cover assembly back into the gauge body. One thing to be aware of, there's a vent slot in the port cover, and the purpose of that slot is that if the port should leak, any steam and water would be directed across and out that slot. You want to orient this slot towards the wide side of the gauge body. The bicolor gauge is a trapezoid shape, meaning that one side of the gauge is wide and the other side, which is over here, is narrow. So for uniformity for this cover assembly, you want to install this slot towards the wide side of the body. So carefully put the port into the center of the gauge. And again, you don't want to damage the new graphfoil seal. And holding it in place, then just thread in just one of the cover bolts to just hold it in place, and then just hand thread in the remaining bolts. Just hand tight. And then you're ready to begin the sequential torquing. So the torque spec is important. It's 30 to 35 foot-pounds, and you just want to use a crosswise torquing method, starting with one bolt, then going to the opposite side, and just kind of going back and forth across the port cover, just sequentially increasing the torque on the bolts. And the torque will be pulling the cover down metal to metal against the gauge body. So as long as you're getting any movement on the bolts, you do want to, recheck all the bolts for the proper torque. And then as a final check, you can look at the side of the port and check that the cover should be metal to metal against the gauge body, because the torque of the bolts is sufficient to pull the cover down metal to metal. So you shouldn't be able to see any gaps between the port cover and the gauge body, and just kind of do a check on both sides of the cover, and you're finished with that. This is step 16 of the repair procedure, reinstalling the illuminator and level display. You can see on this illuminator that there's hooks here, and this is what will fasten onto the studs on the gauge body. So basically then are aligning the illuminator properly, and then it drops down onto the studs, and then the level display section in a similar way, get it lined up, and then it drops down onto the studs. Then you just need to lightly tighten these retaining nuts, and they don't have to be cinched down really tight, but just snugged up on both sides. And then you're complete with that portion of it. So step number 17 is filling out this service sticker and then applying it onto this tag on the gauge. Normally this service sticker is used when all the ports on the gauge are replaced, and it just provides you a quick reference as to when the gauge the maintenance has been performed. So you just fill that out, put it on this tag. This tag has the repair kit part numbers, and also some warning instructions on it. So the last step, number 18, is to return the visual gauge to service. It's important that the gauge is heated up slowly to prevent any damage to the mica especially. And the instructions talk in more detail about how that's done, but essentially you leave the drain valve of the gauge open, and then crack open a small amount the steam inlet valve. This allows a small amount of steam to go through the gauge, but does not build up any pressure in the gauge because the drain is open. And then over a period of time you slowly shut the drain, and this allows pressure to build up in the gauge.